It is indeed my pleasure and the pleasure of the Northwest Business Club and this program committee to have a very special guest today to introduce. He is the founder and president of the State Budget Solutions, of which you have a copy on your table, and also is the founder and president of the Evergreen Freedom Foundation in 1991. And I know you've all heard of the Freedom Foundation, Evergreen Freedom Foundation. As Gary mentioned earlier, he's also been a very favorite speaker here in the past as a Evergreen Freedom Foundation president. Anyway, having said all that, please welcome our speaker today, Mr. Bob Williams.
Thanks, Riggs, and it's a pleasure being here. This is like the, I think, 25th year I've been coming up here. It's been a while.
I think I've been president for about most of them.
But it's really a pleasure. My wife Jane was great enough to drive up here so I could rest on the way up. But I thank you. Many of you have been supporting the Freedom Foundation over the years, and I thank you for that. State Budget Solutions, we started in January of 2011. What we do is look around the country for best practices and worst practices. Needless to say, Washington State is one of the 5 worst in the nation, both on budgets and on collective bargaining reform. But if you want to know what's happening, many years ago, I grew up in Pennsylvania. I was discouraged about what was happening back in the Midwest in Pennsylvania. But if you want to look at the states that are shining bright right now, it's Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, Wisconsin, and North Carolina. Watch those states. There's exciting things happening there. I apologize in advance today for my speech because it's really heavy. Because my heart's very heavy. When I see what's happening at the national level, I believe the United States is at a major crossroads. Folks, spending is unsustainable. There's no way around it. What the Republicans did on this fiscal cliff is unthinkable, unpardonable, and I'm ashamed of it. We're losing the battle for our freedoms. Our president today is spending trillions of dollars, which I call generation theft, because your children and their grandchildren are going to be paying the bills. So what I tried to do is try to put it in perspective. You have a copy on your desk, on your table rather. But if we look at the total revenue for the federal government, we'll see it's $246.9 trillion for this year. The total spending is $3.8 trillion. Those are big numbers. Despite the promises you had from John Boehner on the fiscal cliff, the big deal, the spending for the federal government went up $200 billion. There was no $100 billion cut. Spending is up, it's increased, despite what the president says about his $1.7 billion cut. The new debt this year, $1.6 billion. The national debt, $16.3 trillion. But that's the good news. If we look at the unfunded Social Security, the unfunded prescription drug bill, what did Bush do? The unfunded Medicaid and Medicare, it's $122 trillion. Now those numbers are big. Charlie, Luann, I think you should be on college campus talking about the other side. Take away 8 zeros. People can understand this. If your family income is $24,690 a year, and you spend $37,960, is that a problem? No, you just go get more credit cards, right? No cuts. In fact, they spent $2,000 more than the previous year. That's what your federal government's doing. The new debt on your credit card is only $16,000. I don't know what thanks funding is. So your total credit card debt is $163,110. But to getting your mortgages and everything else, your total debt is $1,221,000. Folks, that's not sustainable. There's no way we can do it. That's the good news. The New York Times held a story after the fiscal cliff deal was passed. Did anyone see the New York Times story on Sunday regarding Social Security? Social Security Administration, the trust fund, has made a major mistake in calculation of life expectancy. They haven't changed the fact that fewer people are smoking today, and they haven't calculated the fact that a lot of people have been losing weight. And they now estimate that their unfunded liability is off by, I have to look here to make sure I say this right, $800 billion. There should be front page news in every newspaper in America. I kind of waited after the fiscal cliff because there goes all the millionaires' tax increase they just passed in the fiscal cliff deal. In addition, and Mark wanted to make sure I talked about this, a lot of libertarians have been asking me for years, why can't we get an audit of the Fed? Why can't we get an audit of the Federal Reserve? And I keep saying, we got an audit of the Federal Reserve. We got an audit. Do you know what the audit said? Anybody know what the audit said? The audit by the Government Accountability Office, where I used to work, 2011. The Federal Reserve has lent to U.S. banks, corporations, and foreign entities in the last 3 years, $16 trillion. That's not the debt. That's another $16 trillion. I mean, I'm throwing trillions around like they're going out of style here. 800 billion Social Security, 16 trillion here that no one's talking about. I used to work, as I mentioned, at the GAO. The former Comptroller General, David Walker, says, and I quote, "The United States today is in worse shape than Greece." And so what do? We just ignore the problem. Meanwhile, somehow miraculously, the United States hit the debt limit. But Treasury Secretary Geithner says, don't worry, I have things I can do. So that interested me, so I did some checking. What is he doing? Well, he's delaying payments to the pension funds. I go, wait a minute. Let me think about this for a minute. These are federal employees who are in a defined contribution pension system. That means they contribute money out of their paycheck to their pensions. So I did some checking. Is this really true? Yes. The money they contribute to their pensions, the Treasury has confiscated. Let me put another perspective. Back to the pennies, we did this a couple years ago. In 1910, the national debt was $2.7 billion. Now that was easier to understand, you know, billions, and then we go to trillions. What's next? Billions. So if every penny is $1 billion, in 1910, that was the national debt. This year, the increase in the national debt on the budget is $1.3 trillion, but with the other debt, it's $1.6 trillion. So let's just talk about $1.3 trillion. Every penny is $1 billion. This is the increase this year. You know, when I do that to students and college kids, suddenly it hits home. They can really understand that. In 2007, and again, this is a lot of things the Republicans don't talk about for some reason, when Pelosi and Harry Reid took control of Congress, I would need 6.7 jars to represent the $8.7 trillion debt. Boy, that sounds good now. 8.7 trillion, I'm talking about 16.3 now. Today, I'd need 12.6 jars to represent that. That's 16,000 pennies. 16,000 billion. Ooh. It just blows me away when you hear that. In 8 years from now, I'd need another 16.6 jars. That doesn't count what they did in the fiscal cliff, I'll come back to that. To represent the projected $21.6 trillion national debt. Since Obama became president, the national debt has gone up at the rate of $4.1 billion a day. This year, the national debt is increasing at the rate of $50,000 a second. You know, you start giving this to young kids, college graduates, they can understand that. What's the problem? In my opinion, the problem, and I've been very harsh on Speaker Boehner, and I'm probably getting harsher on him every day. He does not know how to frame the issue at all. He got trapped. The president of the campaign made clear it's going to be a class on warfare, battle on the rich. The fiscal cliff was not about taxing the rich more. The fiscal cliff was about out-of-control spending and the national debt. And what did Boehner do? He kept defending why we won't raise the taxes on the rich. He put himself in a lose-lose position. And then he came up with, I'll make a deal. And the deal was rejected. Then I'll come up with Plan B. What about Plan A? The fact that the House of Representatives had passed an extension of all the Bush tax cuts and stay on that position. Right. The fact that the House had passed, rather than discretion of federal funds, the alternative cuts, the Ryan budget, they had passed that. And Harry Reid in the Senate hasn't passed the budget for 4 years. What about staying on that?
Right.
And what I tried to get them to do on that New Year's Eve, I guess it was, New Year's Day fiasco that they did, is simply do as Gene can tell you. The House stands firm on their position and demands the Senate recede on its amendment. They would have thrown the ball back to Harry Reid. The House would have explained that we have passed the tax cuts. We have passed the spending cuts, and it's you, Harry, if you want to shut down the government and adjourn. No guts. When you go through this debt deal, I don't know how many people have really looked at it. I went through the other day and I had to call my pastor because there's actually a benefit for churches in their charitable contributions. But I couldn't believe in that. If you make an IRA contribution before January 31st, it will be deemed to be made December 31st. Anyway, let me tell you, here's the bill. This is the actual bill. In the Senate members had 3 minutes to look at this bill before they voted on it. They did not get what is normally required, the Congressional Budget Office scoring of the bill until after they voted on the bill. How any Republican senator could vote for it, I don't understand. But because they voted for it, they're reluctant to criticize it. Let me just talk about a few weird parts of the deal. There's so many weird parts I probably could talk about to noon on this. Number one, there's a $9 billion tax credit for Wall Street banks and major multinationals. Two, there's a rum tax for Puerto Rico. Rum tax for Puerto Rico. Two, a company called Goldman Sachs gets a $1.2 billion tax credit for Goldman Sachs. Wait a minute, I thought this was all about taxing the rich. There's to help NASCAR build racetracks. This is the fiscal cliff bill. Treat coal from Native Americans as alternative energy sources while the administration is closing down other American coal mines. So any coal from a Native American land will be an alternative energy source. That sounds like Washington State, where hydropower is not considered a renewable resource. Promote plug-in electric scooters. Repair the railroads. Subsidize Hollywood. Crack down on tax fraud in prison. I'm not sure what that has to do with. Provide incentives for commuters to take the bus or train. I thought we had so much subsidies for those already. I just can't believe it. So I did an analysis of what the president said immediately after the bill was signed. He said the tax code is too skewed toward the wealthy at the expense of the working middle class. Tonight, we have fixed this. Today, 0.7% of Americans pay 40% of all the income taxes. 0.7% of Americans pay all the income tax. Talk about tax fairness. 43% of all Americans, adults, pay no income tax. Something's wrong here. The law prevents a middle-class tax hike. But when the middle class found out, a lot of them are angry right now because their Social Security, 77% of Americans have a tax cut on the bill. And that doesn't count Obamacare. Last year, he says he signed a $1.7 trillion in deficit reduction. One of the things we have to do is get all members of Congress to stop using this baseline budgeting, where if they want to increase federal spending $10 trillion, and they only increase at $8 trillion, they cut $2 trillion. There was no cut, as I showed you. Federal spending has not gone down, it's gone up consistently. Then the President went on to say, tonight's agreement further reduces the deficit by $620 billion. Congressional Budget Office says it increases the debt by $4 trillion. $4 trillion! Wait a minute, what were they doing? He went on to say, as I demonstrated throughout the past several weeks, I'm very open to compromise. I agree with the Democrats and Republicans that the aging population and the rising cost of health care, Medicare, are the biggest contributor to our deficit. I believe we have to find ways to reform that without hurting seniors. He is not open to any compromise. He never has been. He's not open to any compromise going forward. Now he doesn't want any debt ceiling. He wants Congress to just give him the ability to go forward. Kind of violates the Constitution, but that's an old document to him. Then he goes on to say, so we have to move forward with deficit reduction, but we have to do so in a balanced way, making sure that for every dollar we reduce spending, we raise taxes, because they're still, the wealthy aren't paying their fair share. What have the Republicans responded to these crazy lies? Where's the True Squad? Now, one last point I will make. While we negotiate over many things, I will not have a debate with Congress over whether they should or rack up laws on the debt. Let me repeat, we must pay our past bills. Brett Hume is one of the few announcers I've seen says the fact. There is no danger of the United States defaulting on the debt that's owed. If the debt limit is not raised, we get enough money every month to take care of 60% of the cost of government, which takes care of all the deficit, all the veterans, all Social Security, etc. The 40%, well, there's a lot of government we could shut down. Like, let's get rid of all these loopholes they just put in terms of moving forward. That's the bad news. Going forward, there's 3 battles coming up in the next 2 months. We need you all to get involved in that. Raising the debt ceiling, the March spendings, they kicked that ball ahead 2 months, spending reductions, and the next continuing resolution. I don't think there should be any more continuing resolutions. Every continuing resolution the Republicans lose on. You simply say, Harry, you pass the budget or there's nothing.
Right.
That's the end of it. Now, just to add a few more little factoids that be scary. You know, the last 2 years, Social Security has been in a hole. 69 billion and 60 billion. The President appointed a debt commission. He ignored the report when it was issued. The debt when he became president was 10.6 trillion. It's now 16.4 trillion, heading towards 26 trillion. And we keep going. None of the budgets he's presented has been seriously considered by Congress. He received 0 votes in the House and 0 votes in the Senate. No president has ever had that done. Get no votes on their budget in terms of going forward. The battle as we go forward, to me, is very long. There's no question that Harry Reid and Nancy Pelosi don't want to negotiate. The President doesn't want to negotiate. And John Boehner and Mitch McConnell are terrible negotiators. They don't know how to frame the issue. Let's go back to the election. I heard some discussions about why the Republicans lost. To me, the biggest factor, and I talked to a lot of pollsters like Scott Rasmussen, etc., why did the Republicans lose? It's interesting in the Romney campaign. Do you know the exit polls, Romney won on who is best qualified to promote jobs and take care of jobs? He won on who's best qualified to have a balanced budget going forward. Did he win or lose the election? and he was best qualified as a person who you trust the most. No candidate for president has ever pulled that and lost. But on the key issue that drives the voters on empathy, relating to the people, he lost 76 to 24%. Folks, that's the problem with the Republicans. They don't know how to draw the picture. They don't know how to relate to the average person. And that's why you continually hear the president harp on, well, I'm talking about, the middle class, we're going to take care of the middle class. He just raised taxes on the middle class. Where are the Republicans screaming right now? Oh, they voted for the bill, that's why they won't scream. But why aren't they out there screaming right now of how much the taxes have gone up in the middle class? Why aren't they talking about these bills that are coming due and what it's going to do? It's sad when you look at that particular situation where we're going right now. I mentioned the continuing resolution was a sham because we can't believe them. The chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, past chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff, said, "The greatest threat America faces today is not Russia, China, or radical Islam, but our national debt." That's from the chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff. That should wake up America. Too bad Mark's not here for this one, he'd fall off his chair. Until recently, for every dollar the federal government spent, they borrowed 40 cents. Today, for every dollar the federal government spends, they borrow only 16 cents. And they digitize 24 cents. What? What? In other words, they pretend money. They pretend they have this. I'm serious. They pretend they have the money. The Fed issues bonds, buys the bonds back, issues bonds, buys bonds, and say they have the money. Now, I don't know if it's going to happen this year, next year, or something else. But remember Jimmy Carter? Runaway inflation is going to come. There is a time when runaway inflation will come. There's no way you can continue to do this. So, what do we do about it? I think we go back to the base document. The solution is the first three words of this Constitution. We the people. We're allowing this to happen. Why? We have to put pressure on members of Congress, all members of Congress. You should invite, maybe you have already, a member of Congress to come and address the club. You should invite you two United States senators to do a call-in and ask them what's going on. In December 2011, I was at a meeting of the American Legislative Exchange Council in Scottsdale, Arizona. And former Congressman John Shattuck was the speaker. I highly respect John Shattuck. Very honorable guy. I said, "Congressman, for some reason," and my wife will start laughing. The night before, I started going through the CBO website so I could find some questions to ask him, Congressional Budget Office website. And I saw this interesting thing called unauthorized federal programs. I looked at that and said, there are $261 billion in programs that are not authorized, or whose authorization has expired, and another $788 billion for ones whose expiration date will come up. So I asked Congressman Shattuck, I said, as I read the Constitution, no money shall be drawn from the Treasury, but in consequence of appropriation made by law, and a regular statement shall be published therein. And as I read the House rules, any member of the House who raises a point of order on a continuing resolution that has an unauthorized program in, it's gone. I wasn't ready for his answer. He said, you just broke the biggest secret in Washington, D.C. This agreement, no one raised a point of order. So the next day at breakfast, I had the unique opportunity of being at the same table with former Comptroller General David Walker. And I asked Walker about it, and Walker just looked at me and he said, "Bob, when I was the GO Comptroller General, I used to go up to the House Armed Services Committee, armed with over $500 billion in waste. I walk into the meeting, all the members of Congress, except 2 or 3, would walk out of the hearing, where they could truthfully tell their constituents, I never heard of that. I never heard of that." So I followed up with Congressman Dave Rockerstaff, and he came back and he says, his staff came back and said, "We have an agreement that we'll never raise a point of order on a continuing resolution." Well, I know Robert's Rules of Order. I'm Robert, so I wrote it. No. You can't agree to do away with the point of order before the bill's in front of you. That's the problem, folks. What do we do about solutions? Well, I wrote solutions today, and it was really interesting because last night I had a call from Sacramento newspaper who wanted to know, what do you do? What do you do? And I told them they ran the story before I gave it to you. So I apologize. Anyway, first thing Congress should do in the House, if the House does this, it'll end the problem. Number 1, no more baseline budgets. Well, you take the past budget and the next budget, no baseline budgets. No taking the current budget, adding caseload increases, inflation, other junk, and saying that's the base budget. 2, this is a radical. All legislation must state the specific enumerated power under Article 1, Section 8, under which Congress is acting. Folks, you realize what I just said? I just balanced the budget. Let me repeat that. All legislation must state the power under Article 1, Section 8. When I was talking to the Comptroller General, I said, David, have you ever done a review of the enumerated powers? He said, yes, we presented to Congress. I said, what did it show? He said, now this was under Bush. It's much worse today. 36% of the federal government is one of the enumerated powers of the Constitution. Let me say that in English. 64% of the federal budget is unconstitutional. Yep. What's the problem we're talking about? 2, and now we're going back to like Washington State. The body of all legislation must be in conformance with the title of the bill. In other words, no more adding all this junk on. The bill they added all these amendments on in the Senate was the extension of the taxes. It wasn't all this spending junk, and it didn't meet the title of the bill. No one objected. 2, each bill must be limited to a single subject. That would stop all these earmarks. Didn't the House say they were against earmarks? One of Congress's most important powers is the power of the purse. Congress has overlooked that in recent years. I mentioned, nothing can be spent without an appropriation. I do not consider the resolution appropriation. You know, Banner should say very clearly, we will pass the budget, and if you don't pass an alternative, again, the political process is simple. House passed the budget, the Senate disagreed, they passed their version, you go into conference committee. You don't just say, oh, they're not going to pass one, we'll pass a continuing resolution. No, we'll shut down the government. It'll be your fault, Harry, but they have to have publicity on it. The House should refuse to consider any earmarks that have not been brought up in committee. I mean, there are some legitimate earmarks, but they should be brought up in committee and testified and justified. The House should zero fund all programs identified by the Congressional Budget Office as unauthorized appropriations. That's a simple one. That's only $800 billion. Have the CBO Congressional Budget Office create a transparent website. You know, citizens want to know where does the money come from. How about a 72-hour timeout before they can vote on any budget? Wouldn't that be radical? And required to have the CBO marked up on the bill. No legislation, including budget amendments, should be considered unless they've been posted online for the public to look at it for 24 hours. Any legislation that contains an appropriation should have a published fiscal note before it's voted on. If you did that, I think there'd be simple things. Now, I have thousands of suggestions of where the fat is in government and where to cut it. But the real thing is, we have to really take our government back. And the only way we're going to do that is to get active as individuals, because it is unsustainable. So I just hope that people will get involved, and we remember Ronald Reagan's warning, freedom is never more than one generation from extinction. We didn't pass it on to our children in their bloodstream. It must be fought for, protected, and handed on to them to do the same. But one day we'll spend our time telling our children and our grandchildren what it was once like to live in America, where men and women were free. I'm not willing to do that. I know you're not. With that, I'll be glad to answer your questions.
We're already there.
Not yet.
We have our usual period of time for questions and answers. When you get called upon, please stand up, state your name, and ask your question. Start in front.
Not so much a question as an observation, but one of the advantages of trillion-dollar budget is that you can steal $1 billion and no one will notice. And if anyone notices, they'll merely shrug their shoulders. That's what is essentially going on in Washington, whether it's stolen by individuals or by organizations. And you're never going to. And then one other thing, the Republicans can follow your advice here and publicize all these sins, but who is going to announce all these sins, but who's going to publicize it in a manner that the average individual can understand it or want to even understand it?
Who's going to publicize it? The new movement, the social media, which is really growing. I was very encouraged when I heard that the Capital of Pennsylvania newspaper is going to twice a week The capital of New York is going to twice a week. Those tree issue papers, as the Wall Street Journal calls it, they're going out of business. Do you know the New York Times founders' grandkids are suing the New York Times because they're not making enough money? I love it. But the difference will be the groups. The problem is the Republican Party has been asleep. We've allowed our leadership in Congress to take the leadership first. We have many great members of Congress, but leadership is terrible. You know, if you look back at one of the trials with Boehner, and I hate to beat up on him so much, but he deserves it. But if you look at him, he was in the leadership with Newt Gingrich, the Contract for America. That guy's been there forever. And his whole goal is, let's make a deal. Any kind of deal, let's make a deal. Keep things going.
Don't rock the boat.
Don't rock the boat. And we'll get our pork, you know, we'll put your pork. What do you want? You want some pork? Oh, we'll put the agriculture subsidies in. Now we'll get some more votes. So we need the Republicans to get active. We need the Tea Party groups. A lot of Tea Party groups are getting active. We need the other groups to get involved. We need the home builders to get involved. We need to get people involved because this is a battle for our country and for our kids' future. We can't continue. And just one other thing, you just said, aren't we already there? Let me answer
How
that
do you
question.
know when you've lost? I guess is my question.
Folks, here's the good news. The United States has now more proven energy resources than anywhere in the world. We have more natural gas than all of the Middle East. Problem is, this president's locking it up. He's locking up oil, he's locking up natural gas, he's locking up nuclear, and he's shutting down coal. But we have the potential. Once that opens up, if you watch the price of natural gas and how much it's going down, and it's interesting now in the campaign he claimed, well, there's more natural gas exploration. Yeah, it's all on private lands. And it's going to continue. And we have more governors that are willing to move forward. And one of my exciting projects I'm working on is federalism, where we're trying to get the states more involved in taking their powers back under the 9th and 10th Amendments.
My name is Luann. Bob, if John Boehner had done what you suggested and thrown it back into the Senate, and we had gone over the fiscal cliff, what would have happened at that point? What would that have looked like?
The stock market would have gone up because federal spending would have been reduced and taxes would have gone up. Then there would have been an immediate action to change some of the taxes, to reduce some of the taxes. But you know, right now we're in danger of losing our credit rating, having our federal credit rating lowered even more. You can't continue. You know, there's no way we can continue at this present rate. There's absolutely no way. But the problem is, the Republicans don't market the issue. They're not exposing all this fraud and what occurred. They're not talking about the upcoming 3 big issues. The president already has framed it. Oh, I'm not going to have any negotiations with the Republican deadline where you have to pay all our bills. Who are the Republicans talking about? Wait a minute, we're going to pay our bills. There's no question we'll pay our bills. But we're talking about the excess spending. They're not even talking about that. Brett Hume is making a better case for that than anybody else. They have to learn the language, and they have to learn the language of empathy with the people and talking about what this means for the average person on the street. Because what the president's doing, and you're going to see it right now in healthcare, the Obama healthcare as it was into effect, more and more senior people are going to get medical treatment. Can't give it to them anymore, sorry. Yes, sir.
Joe Wilson. What do you think of the new solution, the $1 trillion corn?
Only the Congress has the ability to make coins. Only the Congress has the ability to do money, get rid of the Fed. You know, I just heard this congressman yesterday. It wasn't Senator Paul, but it could have been Senator Paul. Just said, let's abolish the Fed and abolish all the Fed debt that the Fed created to themselves.
That's right. That's right.
Sounds like Lincoln. Sounds like Lincoln. Yes.
A lot of people I talk to say if anything hard takes place, we're going to have rioting in the streets. Can you speak to that?
We're going to have rioting in the streets. I think it was 2 years ago, I was back in Boston, and I had an Evergreen American cab driver, and he said he was going to be quitting in about a year because he didn't want to be there in the summer because there's going to be rioting in Boston. The riots are going to start in California and Illinois. Those states are totally out of control. There is no tax structure you can devise that will pay the bills that are owed in Illinois and in California. No tax rate. There's no tax rate. And we're going to find that out at the federal level soon. So once they start making some of these cuts, there's going to be riots. There will be riots. The question is, if the Republicans have been working in advance to educate the people on why this has occurred. Otherwise, it's going to be the Republicans that. They cut that. They cut that. We have to show them what's happening. Yes, sir.
The solution. You mentioned the 43% that don't pay tax. Let's adjust that downward a little bit. Start with some of those low-income people and let them have a little skin in the game. Very modest tax, but have them pay a little bit, and then there'll be more attention paid to waste.
That's one thing. You know, the other thing, the biggest area you can cut is Medicaid without affecting people. When I was up here, I don't know, 10, 12 years ago, I mentioned that in Washington State, they were paying teachers $10 a head, $10 a person, to get kids in the schools who had health insurance to go on Medicaid. Now, two things happened. One is we put more people on Medicaid, which was the big aim of the last 3 Democrat governors, get more and more kids on Medicaid. The second thing is then with the parents, they no longer had the kids on their health care plan, their rates went up. Because the kids, and I'm not the insurance guys can tell you why kids get less sick, anyway, younger, etc. But Medicaid has turned into a joke of what it is right now. We need a Medicaid designed for its original purpose, not what it's doing right now. And the Medicaid right now in the state budgets take up more money than education.
An observation. It seems to me that the biggest problem Republicans have is a lack of articulation. And I have tied that back to basically a lack of courage to speak the truth because everybody is always worried about re-election. That's a big game. Keep your job and keep being re-elected. What is your opinion about getting a movement going about term limits?
Term limits is a great idea. I mean, actually, I think...
I still have a case of gridlocks, Bob.
Yeah, I think you and I talked about it. You know, in some cases you might say, term limits is a terrible idea, but whose time has come. It's the only alternative. I mean, it really is. We passed term limits in the state, but Speaker Foley at that time was able to find a favorable judge to get it thrown out. I mean, strange things happen in Washington State in terms of court cases. But we also need term limits on congressional staff.
There's the problem.
Yeah, a big problem.
There's the 3 minutes to not read it.
Yeah. But I mean, see, that's what they should demand. No, we're going to take 72 hours to do it. And, you know, all they had to do is, they've done this before, kick the ball ahead for 72 hours, kick the ball ahead for a week. What did they just do in the spending cuts? They kicked at it. They could have kicked the whole thing ahead. But instead, they caved. Other questions? Okay.
Bob, can you do 3 minutes on what you think is going to happen with Sheldon and Tom and the new Republican majority with the budget process down in Olympia?
Who knows what's going to happen? Well, first thing is, are they going to stick together on Monday to do it? And this is the coalition now in the Senate where you'll have the Democrats and Republicans. This happened before. It happened in the 70s, I guess, was the last time we had that coalition. But it should be good. But I don't know. Gene and I were talking before. This will probably be the most interesting governor we've had in any of your lifetime. And I hate to say this, he is what I would consider the dumbest, least informed governor we've ever had. I've never known of a new governor who's coming into office Monday. He takes his office Monday. He hasn't appointed his staff. No one knows who the budget director is. I mean, he takes office Monday. He's only appointed, I think, 3 or 4 people. So the question is, what kind of governor will we have, which often drives the agenda. But there's a real problem still in the House in trying to get anything through. But again, the battle we fight was with your former senator. Anyway, with Kelly, in a way, in the past, you know, the Democrats claim they kept spending $8 billion in the last 3 or 4 years. You have the Freedom Foundation's newsletter there, which shows spending was not cut. It's gone straight up. It's continually gone up, and that's this darn baseline budgeting gimmick they use in terms of doing that. But the other thing is, when I was really active in the Freedom Foundation, and now I just speak and help them raise money, Washington State has, as 48 other states do, 49 states have a balanced budget requirement. The last 3 years, Washington State didn't balance the budget. They didn't do it. There's no penalty. And it takes an attorney general to sue them. Well, this particular attorney general we have right now didn't want to bring that issue up, I don't know, because of the campaign or what, so it was not brought up. So 3 years in a row, we've had an unbalanced budget. We spend more. And that's one of the problems you find out in Congress. The same thing with the federal balanced budget requirement. If they don't follow the law, what do? That's where you need people to sue or impeach. Other questions? Yes.
In your personal opinion, has he done anything that is impeachable?
Yes. Repeated violations of the Constitution.
Would you name those?
The czars.
Keep going.
I can't think of them all right now, but right now off the top of my head I can't think of them, but there's a
If
whole
he
bunch.
does an executive order on the Second Amendment?
Excuse me?
If he does an executive order on the Second Amendment, as he's talking
I don't know. You know, they'll probably cave in on that one too. There's no one in leadership in the House or Senate who has backbone today.
Right.
I thought Cantor was going to stand up, but he caved. No one has leadership. And I don't know what they're afraid of.
Riots in the street.
No, but someone brought up a while ago, you brought up, I think, about standing firm. Look at Mark Rubio. He stood firm, he voted against it, yeah, and the guy has presidential ambitions, but he believes in his position. And we got some new members that are really that strong. But, boy, when I looked at the Senate, how many caved in, I couldn't believe it. Boy, there were only 3 or 4 Republican senators who voted against it. And they hadn't even read it. And they didn't even know how much it costs. Other questions? Yes.
Lorraine Newman, I don't know if it's a question, or perhaps a request, that perhaps Evergreen Foundation could do some type of an article on subsidies. And I guess we like to beat up on these politicians a lot. And those out here who are elected officials know this. We really beat up on you guys. But then I've done phone calling here for phone calls and stuff. And it really, they come back here and it's not my subsidy. And I think that's bigger than not in my backyard. One, I don't think we realize how much we are subsidized. And no one wants to give up their subsidy. We don't want to give up the subsidy that gives us cheap milk and cheap food. We don't want to give up the subsidies that give us birth control. We don't want to give up the subsidies that give us this great Social Security program. We don't want, they come back, and the reason they can't vote and stand firm is because they come back to us, and I think we have to shoulder this responsibility out here and our part of the blame. We all have a subsidy that we don't want to give up.
I hear you, but I know many members of Congress who have never voted for any subsidy, any earmarks who've been reelected. The question is, do you frame it to the voters correctly? And that's the key issue. Do you frame it correctly? Because I'll tell you, one of my solutions to the federal budget is right now the states are getting roughly 1/3 of their total budget is federal funding. I would cut it all out. 100% gone. Overnight. Now, if the states want to raise taxes, wait just a second. If the states want to raise taxes to do that, they can. If the states want all this junk from the federal government, they can. But otherwise, you got rid of all that red tape. Let me tell you, in education, this is like 5 years ago, 60% of the paperwork at school districts was in search of 7% of their funding from the federal government. Now it's much higher. Get rid of all that.
I agree with you, but when you get down to the grassroots level and on those telephones, they say, but he will vote against my Social Security, or he will vote against my food stamps, or he will vote against my whatever, because we have all become so subsidized out here. And I think we have to take shoulder some of this blame ourselves, and we have to look at giving up some of this largesse that's coming to us, and we have to start speaking positively. We can survive without this largesse coming from Washington, D.C., coming from Olympia. And that's a mindset we voters have to change out here amongst ourselves.
I agree with part of what you're saying, but in the case of Social Security, those people who paid in, I don't think we take away the benefits they paid in. Now, can we change retirement age? Can we change COLAs? Yes. In the case of food stamps, my goodness, we've got to change that. It's ridiculous who we're giving food stamps to right now and what they can use it for. And one of the biggest problems is the grocers who will lobby for more and more.
I'll give you another one. My brother said it, and people, wealthy people, and they were so happy that they had a subsidy for their gym membership under their Medicaid or Medicare because they paid in and it was due them. This thing about we paid in and it's due us, we have to stop that. Wealthy people are just as susceptible as somebody who needs food stamps. And we have to have this conversation.
A lot of what you're saying is correct, and it's going to happen. If it doesn't happen now, it's going to really be brutal. It's going to be brutal. And what's going to happen is the youth that get stuck with all these bills are going to say, we're not going to take care of your health care.
Yes, and
There'll be
so
none.
we've got to have this conversation.
Bob Bruce Ayers. I appreciate your demonizing the Republican leadership for not stopping or not preventing or not opposing what's happening. And it's probably valid that they deserve to be criticized. But is not the real demon the liberal Democrat who is lying and who is passing and who is proposing and who is spending in the first place? I mean, it's one thing to criticize the sheriff for not stopping crime. It's another thing to not blame the criminals for creating the crime. So I guess I'm wondering why is it that the Republican, which you, I like to say, probably deserving of criticism, is the bad guy, while the people actually doing it, the Democrats in the Senate and the Democrat leadership in the White House, are the ones that are spending it, proposing it, lying about it, and actually executing it. So are they not the true enemy, as opposed to the leadership that just can't seem to get together enough to prevent it?
The true enemy is the President, the House, and the Senate. Now, as I give my classes on budgets to state legislators all around the country, I say you only have to control the President, the House, and the Senate, and you're in charge. No president, including Obama, can spend a cent unless it's authorized by the House. That's Boehner. In other words, what I proposed 2 years ago is they could zero out Obamacare. Zero funded. They can zero fund it. Obama cannot veto that. There is no way he can veto that. And if the Senate doesn't pass it, it's zero. It's zero. If they zero fund it, and the Senate says, we're not going to go along with you, it's zero. You can't do that. And so the reason I'm hitting so hard on Boehner is the most important power of the United States Congress is the power of the purse. It's the only real power they have. And they're just throwing it away. They're always caving in. Well, we can't get that done. Let's pass a continuing resolution. We'll take care of the next battle next time. That's why.
Nita Deitch. Well, in regards to what Bruce was saying, don't you think that some of the fault is the liberal news media? And shouldn't we boycott all the things that they advertise on these liberal stations? Maybe that would get their attention.
No, I think that really, if you want to get down to the bottom line fault, I hate to say that, but I get stoned. We the people. We the people have elected members of Congress, members of the legislature, and we forget about them. And then when they come back home and they talk about how tough the thing is, we let them off the hook. Why do we do that? If they're not doing the job, we need to throw them out of office. We need to recruit someone and get behind that someone and make sure that person wins. Yes, we've got a problem with the media, but it's nowhere near what it used to be. Did you see the media when Lincoln ran for president? The media is nothing like that now. Now you have Fox, and you have all these alternative stations, and you have social media, and everything else to do it. So unless we, the people, say, hey, it's me. I have to get involved. I have to communicate to my neighbors what's going on. I have to get on that college campus and be willing to speak to those groups. I got to go to those high schools where those liberal professors are and ask if I can't talk to the class on civic affairs or talk on something and get into the classroom. and get the students involved and ask them to volunteer to work on various things. We need to take back our country. And if we wait for the media to change, yeah, the newspapers are going to change in a couple of years, they'll go bankrupt. But I don't know how long it's going to be for NBC, CBS, ABC to change, and unfortunately, a lot of people get their news there. But we have the opportunity right now to make things really uncomfortable on John Boehner.
Yes.
That's why I'm putting so much pressure on him. Yes, sir.
Kathy Goddard. I agree with you that we the people are responsible. I agree with this woman over here who says there's wealthy people who feel entitled. I think that was the word you were looking for. They have this entitlement mentality. And I value listening to you about everything you're saying about the budget. If I have a question about the budget, I'll come to you. However, I have a lot of respect for John Boehner. He is a powerful politician in terms of his grasp of the dynamics of politics, of getting people reelected who are Tea Party people. And if he thinks that the deal that he got was the best deal he could get, I'm willing to trust his judgment on that. Because the Bush tax cuts got finalized. That was a club the Democrats had over the Congress every 2 years, was that these were temporary tax cuts. Now they're finalized. Sure, the rates got increased 450 and above, but if that's the best deal he could get, I'm willing to take his word for that until I hear his side of the story and can judge his side of the story better. Because look at what happened with the Sandy Hook bill. He just postponed it for a week, and Representative Peter King, a Republican, trashed him, and then he apologized sort of later when the vote took place. And then Chris Christie, one of the most powerful men in the country, you know, who has all the Obama credentials he needs, trashed him. I trust John Boehner's judgment of the political situation as far as it goes until I can hear his side of the story. I think the real problem here is that we can't rely on Tea Party people, we can't rely on Republicans. We have to talk to Democrats, we have to talk to independents, and get them to understand what we understand about the crisis. And it's that sense that we can't just mobilize conservative people. We have to reach out to everybody in the country and not write them off.
I appreciate your comments. Let me talk about the Sandy bill first. Why didn't the Republicans publicize in advance all the earmarks and junk in there for last February day after? Why didn't they publicize that? And why didn't they, which I tried to get them to do at the last minute, use the cost of paying for it, all those earmarks that were thrown into the fiscal bill? It would have more than paid for it. But instead they didn't frame it. Now, in terms of Boehner, I strongly disagree with you. The bill they passed increases the national debt $4 trillion. There's no excuse for that. There's no excuse for all the earmarks that were in that bill. There is no excuse whatsoever. And Boehner lost members. You know, if you trust him that much, watch out, because he's going to cave on the next 3 big issues coming up, and they're coming up in the next 2 months. Unless we put some backbone behind him. That was most revealing to me. They had long, like 5 long phone calls with a member of the House Republican leadership prior to the votes on the 28th, 29th, and 30th, and I was shocked, and so was that member, at the lack of information they had. I said, oh really, I didn't know that. Oh really, I didn't know that. They're not given the information they need. They're the same as what Nancy Pelosi did. Pass the bill and we'll tell you what's in it afterwards. We can't do that anymore. 72 hours in advance.
One last question.
I just want to make a comment, gentlemen. About Boehner. He does control the House, he controls spending. When he started debating with Obama, Yvonne wouldn't even be in the room with me because I was so angry because Obama has zero to do with the budget process. When I was in Olympia, we passed our budget. Then we met with ours in the Senate. Then we met with theirs in the Senate. Lowry had 2 choices. He could veto it or he could sign it. The same with the president. What Boehner passes is what the president has a choice on. And he should be debating with Harry Reid, not with the president. It's not his job. And we went to Victoria for 3 weeks. Yvonne was in heaven because I didn't watch the news.
Anyway, thank you all.